The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government has spent a great deal of time and a great deal of money promoting their Jobs Here strategy. This is a strategy without solid targets, without a concrete vision, and that fails to support 90% of small businesses in the province. Given the undeniable fact that small business is the most powerful driver of job creation in Nova Scotia, my question to the Minister of Economic and Rural Development is, how can he have a job creation strategy that fails to support and invest in small business?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank the member opposite for the question. And, you know, small business makes up 96% of the business here in Nova Scotia. And I will say this, Mr. Speaker, is through the Jobs Here strategy and other strategies, we have tax incentives for small business in the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, we have the PIP program. We have reduced the taxes twice, Mr. Speaker, something that hasn't been done in 20 years. Mr. Speaker, we work with partners such as the independent business, the Federation of Independent Business. Mr. Speaker, it is erroneous for anyone in this House or anyone outside of this House to think that we don't cater to and try to assist small business with training initiatives, co-op programs, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I could go on at length.
The honourable member for Yarmouth on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this minister might think he's helping small business, but small business operators don't. In fact, they said this government's policies are marginalizing them and eroding their sector, and I'll table those comments. And that's because the conditions laid out by the Jobs Here strategy make many small businesses ineligible to access funding, because over 1/3 of the small businesses in the province don't benefit from the marginal reduction in small business tax, and because despite the slight planned reduction in small business tax, our small business taxes are still among the least competitive in the entire country. My question for the minister is, when will this government recognize that they have created an environment that punishes small business owners?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, without a doubt, we've recognized when we were in opposition, there were a lot of barriers that were facing small businesses in the province of Nova Scotia. What we've done in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, as I've already mentioned, is we've created an environment that's going to be more conducive to small business, Mr. Speaker. We have co-op programs, Mr. Speaker. We've reduced the threshold for the PIP program, which will allow more people, more small business to access that funding, Mr. Speaker. We have training initiatives targeted for small business, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the efforts that we are doing for small business in the province of Nova Scotia have not gone unnoticed. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work with small business, those stakeholders, and those partners that we currently have to produce and to make conditions better here for small business in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Yarmouth on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the minister might be able to ignore me in this House, but he can't ignore all the small and independent business owners out there that are saying they need more support from this government. In addition to the uncompetitive small business tax rates, our province also has the highest sales tax in the country. This drives up costs paid by small businesses and results in consumers spending less in our province. This government fails to admit that higher taxes, higher user fees, and higher energy costs actually severely hurt small business owners. My question to the Premier, will he explain why this government continues to leave small business behind?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member ought to get his facts straight. First of all, things like HST are an input tax credit, so they have no effect on small business cost base whatsoever, Mr. Speaker. That's the first thing. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I will, since the member opposite likes to table things, I'll table this. This is a quote from Leanne Hashie, who was the Vice President of Atlantic Canadian Federation of Independent Business. It says, "We are very pleased with the results of the province's work to date in making the regulatory process a more effective and efficient one for businesses in Nova Scotia. We will continue to work with our government partners to further streamline and refine requirements, Mr. Speaker.